It's not my first rodeo, but this one is honestly, it's been an odyssey, literally an odyssey, because it's taken me over 10 years to bring this book to fruition. One thing that really changed the game for me, I think, was reading, right? And I read loads of biographies and I started to understand the journey. There's that popular iceberg metaphor. If you just imagine an iceberg, what you see above the surface is just a small part of what's really going on. And it's the same when you see any level of success, is that you don't see all the failure and the work that went into things.
Harry, good to see you, my friend. Excited to have you on, well, to chat with you today because basically, I'm still feeling really ropey for those that listened into the last episode. I'm still feeling dizzy. So I'm going to make Harry do all the talking today. So without him knowing it, I'm going to ask you, Harry, to talk us about the journey of your book, which is going to be, by the time people listen to this, it's already going to be out there. It's going to be on the shelves. People are going to be buying it. If you listen to our last episode, hopefully you heard a little bit about it and you went out and got it in Amazon now. I'm not sure if the window of the price reduction is still available, but I thought, why not have a bit of an episode today where
Mm,
you do most of the talking because my mind is still dizzy with this
yeah, no
labyrinthitis,
worries.
and tell us the journey of your book. How does that sound?
That sounds great. And let me just say before I get started and all that, I do hope you feel better soon. It's like,
Yeah.
I,
I don't know if these antibiotics are doing me any favors. I
do you know
feel
what?
worse.
I was thinking about you as I walked around. So I'm recording this at my sister's place, which is around the corner from my place because my internet's not set up there. And I was walking and I saw a fairly young person, but they were walking with one of those, those push things that are also a seat, so that when they get tired,
Yeah.
they sit
Yeah.
down. And like my first instinct was, oh, look, someone so young using one of those. And I thought, actually, you know what? Probably Nick in his current state would probably benefit from one of those things
I'll tell you
because
what,
it's really dizzy to walk.
I walked out yesterday to take Leo to football, and I walked out the front door and literally fell into the flower bed. Just lost my balance. I went out to the right. It is really it's a word I don't get to use often. I quite like the opportunity to use it. It's very discombobulating.
Mm,
There you go. That's what it is.
I like that word. Yeah.
It's and tiring. Like looking at a screen all day at work, and look. I'll be honest. Even looking now, obviously I'm seeing you, but we're looking at the video screen. I'm looking through the screen. It's just exhausting on the eyes and exhausting on the senses. So, hey, it's not a little mini violin about me today. I want to have a exciting hero's journey story about your
Yeah.
book because it's not your first rodeo.
It's not my first rodeo, but this one is honestly, it's been an odyssey, literally an odyssey, because it's taken me over 10 years to bring this book to fruition. And in the meantime, I wrote the other book, Working Well, back in 2018. My first book, The Full Gym, came out in 2013, but I started work on this one around 2014, 2015. So a good 10 years in making. Now, part of the reason for that is there was a little bit or a lot of procrastination on my part, a lot of, because this is my life's work, I wanted it to, I don't know, I kind of was just hesitant, right? I
It's your
think a lot of people,
midlife's work, right?
yeah, my
How do you
midlife
phrase it? Right, that's what another one in 50 years' time.
or quarter life's work.
To this
But
point, your life's work to this point.
but yeah, and then there was me procrastinating about a cover, trying to get a forward done. I've got a forward done by a guy I know who's a former Olympic, well, he's a Olympic silver medalist, and he actually came across my work back in 2014, and was one of the early people to have actually gone through my entire online course around the philosophy that I talk about in the book. And we've been friends ever since. He actually lives in Brighton as well, coincidentally enough. I saw him about a month ago. We went for a swim together, which was great and everything. So he's done the forward and he's been to 3 Olympics. He's Tom Daley's mentor and he won the silver medal in the synchronized, is it 10 meter? I think it was a synchronized 10-meter board in Athens in 2004. So he wrote the forward for me, which is great. So there was a bit of a delay after delay, but ultimately I think it was a bit of one of this perfectionist fear. And part of me is not perfect in terms of what I wanted the cover to be or anything like that, but I just wanted to get it out there. And for me, that was the most important thing. But in terms of the journey of it, I mean, it started really, we were talking about last episode that we've known each other since 2010, right? And so when we met in 2010, I was going through a bit of a transition. So I believe it was around July that we did the cycle trip, right? July 2010. That summer, I was going through redundancy at work and eventually got made redundant in September. Actually, maybe it was September we were doing the trip. I can't remember, but either way, I got made redundant around September, October, and I went on a bit of a journey. I actually welcomed the redundancy. I wanted that change. I was always not feeling like I was in a career as sorts. I was just in a job. I think, as you know, I went traveling for 2 and a bit years after uni. I went and went off to live in Greece for 6 months. I came back. I started working in a pub in in the local pub that I used to drink in when I was a teenager. And I got this first class degree in physics and astrophysics, 3 years of traveling around the world, and I'm working in the local pub. And then I eventually get a temp job, like a 3-week temp job in the law firm of my sister's law firm. That ends up being a 15-month job. And then I get made redundant from there. At the time, I got an injury, so I spent a bit of time just rehabilitating after that. And then I end up working at the London Stock Exchange. So I'm there for 6 years, and I never feel it's like a job. And I'm always waiting for this sign from the universe for like to tell me what to do. And the sign never comes. But I thought if the sign was to come, it would probably be being made redundant. And so I used that as an opportunity to start my journey. And I went and I was looking into NLP, neuro linguistic programming, which I've been into for a while. That led me onto personal development courses, personal development clubs that I joined. And ultimately, what happened is around 2011, January, February 2011, I went to a course. And that course was led by Tony Robbins's chief trainer, a guy called Joseph McClendon III. And he was the picture of health. And we were doing a 2-day seminar, but it was all about really the law of attraction and his version of it and accelerating that. But the last hour on the second day, he starts talking about health. And he looked in great shape. He looked about 35, at least from where I was, but it turns out he was 57. And he brings on people that have come on his health program, and they're like raving about it, saying how they never get colds over the winter and all of this, that, and the other. So I go and chat to them for a bit. And they say that he does this 5-day retreat and he brings on an author of this book. And the retreat was like £5,000. And I said, well, what's the author and what's the book? And they told me the book, and the book was like £5. So here I'm weighing up £5, £5,000. And I decided to buy the £5 book, of course. I read that, and that starts me on a bit of a journey of, like you mentioned before, reading hundreds of books, like approximately a book a week for about 2 to 4 years. And then I started going on a bit of a rabbit hole and understanding about health. Like, okay, we can reverse certain what I thought were incurable diseases or chronic diseases. We don't have to age like everybody else. We can do all these amazing things. And ultimately, I actually got a little bit frustrated and angry because I felt like I'd been lied to my whole life about, heart disease, right? We can reverse heart disease. We can do all sorts of amazing things. And so that really got me, and I was always into fitness, but that really got me into understanding, firstly, the demarcation between health and fitness. They're not one and the same. And secondly, also at the same time, because I'd left the London Stock Exchange, I started contracting at Sainsbury's head office, and I was being paid per day. So if I'm ill, like you're currently ill, right? You work for yourself as well. So you're going to work, right? I work for myself. I was going to work, right? If you're an employee, you can take a sick day when don't feel well. So I realized that health was number one. If I didn't have health, I didn't have anything.
There's a
Uh,
couple of things here. I want to just slow it down because
yeah,
I'm aware that otherwise the listeners are going to have a full hour of a monologue on your story. We need a little moment of reflection, as we know. We talk about that and just let it all kind of sink in. What's quite interesting, a couple of things that I picked up on that you mentioned. One is you've already started to describe a very well-known story narrative that we come familiar with, which is a bit like the hero's journey, right? You've gone there down on your luck, redundancy, pulling yourself back up. And as you meant your words, I was in a bar. I've got a first in physics and astrophysics, and here I am working in a bar. Like, where's my life come to? And then trying to work it out. And there's a bit of the Howie we know and love in there as well. £5,000 course, £5 book. It makes sense. So now you're an author of your own or of several, which is great. I also wanted to come back a little bit right to the start of this. For me, it was I've got a passion around fear, but and researching fear, but it was a kind of a throwaway comment. You kind of said at the start, like, I was probably fearful about doing it. I had to make sure everything was lined up, everything was ready, and doing it yourself. So, what have been the key things that have helped you overcome your fear of procrastination, your fear of publishing, your fear of being you know, you want people I know because I know you well, I know you want as many people to read this as possible. It's your seminal work. It's something that we know can make a difference. But equally, when you put yourself out there, you're open to criticism, you're open to people saying, "This is useless, it doesn't help, it's not based on X, Y, or Z." It may people just make things up sometimes to bring somebody down. So tell me a little bit about your
Yeah,
journey into your own fears and how you overcame those.
yeah, that's a good question. I think the answer is multifactorial. So a couple of things. One thing that really changed the game for me, I think, was reading, right? And I read loads of biographies, and I started to understand the journey or there's that popular iceberg metaphor when we talk about just mind and the subconscious mind. And for those listening, if you just imagine an iceberg, what you see above the surface is just a small part of what's really going on. And it's the same when you see any level of success, is that you don't see all the failure and the work that went into things. And, there are classic examples, right? You've got Thomas Edison, 1,000 or 10,000 ways to not invent the light bulb. James Dyson, who invented the Dyson vacuum cleaner, 1,600 or prototypes. Colonel Sand.
I'd use the Iron Man as a good one, mate. People will always see you've done an Iron Man and that's great, and people have no idea often
Uh,
how many hours are put into the
well,
training. It's
this is it.
a year's worth commitment, year-long
It's
commitment.
so much effort, and even when I was, when I was dating a girl for like 4 years, like, I saw her success, but I also saw all the stuff that she did behind the scenes that other people didn't see. And so partly some of that was encouraging and understanding the failures that every successful person goes through,
Yeah.
they have to go through. That reframed it a little bit for me. Another thing that reframed it, like when you're putting yourself out there in terms of that, and I usually use this as advice to people who are putting out YouTube videos or anything like that. And I say pretty bluntly, but the reality is, most people are not going to watch it. Right? To know people, like people are, I mean, I've got videos on there with barely 100 views 15 years later, right? Yes, I've got some with 250,000, but I've got a lot which are in the hundreds. Hardly anyone's going to see him, right? And those views are not necessarily the whole length of that video either. So this fear that we have, this imagined fear often of, everyone eyeballs on us, it's rarely the case. The other thing is, one thing that resonated with me, I still remember it, is the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman. And he said something about, if you're not embarrassed by the first product that you ship, then you waited too long. And that really, really stuck with me. I remember
Mm.
when I first heard that, I was just entering the basement of my flat that I lived in at the time. And I heard that and it just pierced me. And I thought, here's a guy who's created LinkedIn, which now sold to Microsoft or whatever. And he say, if you're not embarrassed by that first product, you waited too long. And I thought, God damn, right. And a bunch of things like, how we iterate constantly,
You
right?
might laugh, right? I'm just gonna interject here.
Yeah.
Yesterday, my son, his first couple of days at school, he's been quite nervous about going, and on day 2, day 3, he learned to make pancakes. Bear with me here, I'm going somewhere with this. And it was something he really, really enjoyed, but he came back with something that I've always known, which is the first pancake is always the worst one. You gotta get
Mm,
the first one off the pan, it's when you're still gonna get the oil right. It always comes out like a bit of a mess, but the second, third, and fourth are perfect. And that's kind of it's a similar kind of thing, right? We've got to accept the fact that we launched this podcast. As you know, I'm a big doer. I don't procrastinate too much. I've
no.
studied fear for a number of years. I know when it's trying to make me cautious, when it's speaking to me and trying to stop me from doing something, I often think I need to do the opposite. And we know if we look back, those first episodes aren't as polished, aren't as clear. We don't really know what our direction is. We're learning as we go. And there's still a lot of learning for us to go through as we continue.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just got to do, right?
Well, as I say, like every master was once a disaster, right? And the reality is, I say to my students all the time when I start my workshop off, I go, I want you to fail. And I give the reasons why, right? And I ask them as well, and I say, who fails more, a successful or an unsuccessful person? The reality is a successful person fails way more times than an unsuccessful person because they keep going. But also a number of years ago, and I've mentioned it before, I think, the reframing of the word fail, right? First attempt in learning. and just little things like that, which really hit me. And I've been drumming into my nieces since the last 7, 8 years or longer. Practice makes progress, right? I hate that phrase, practice makes perfect, that most people hear, because perfection leads to procrastination. It's the enemy of action. And I think I've been guilty of that a lot of the time because I was quote unquote a perfectionist, but that's really,
My friend on the golf course said perfectionists are the least happiest people on the planet. And the reason for that is they live in a place of comparison. To be a perfectionist, you are constantly comparing yourself.
it's
Is my
pointless.
book going to be good enough? Is this
I
going to be good
mean,
enough? When will I be good enough?
exactly. So I think like perfection is the enemy of action, and that's so all of these things helped shape this idea of just go for it, right? Yeah, screw it, let's do it, sort of thing. I actually have on my, you probably didn't, you probably saw it in the gym, but there's a scroll, and the history behind that scroll is quite long. It's one of my first personal development events I went to, which was back in 2006. And it was called the ISA experience, ISA, the Institute for Self-Actualization. And I went there because actually my older sister had gone, and I did the basic course, and then I did the advanced course. And there was a process there. But anyway, at the end of the process, there was this sheet, and it was a scroll, and basically says it was supposed to be said in like a Chinese accent or whatever, but it says, "Ah, what the fuck, go for it anyway." And that's on my window in the gym, which you may have seen or not. But the
Um,
idea was just go for it. And actually, it was quite a powerful process that we did there. And so all of these things, right? Reframing fail, understanding the Reid Hoffman quote, reading the biographies, recognizing that people aren't simply going to watch your stuff mostly. All of this helped redefine how I approach that. However, when it came to this book, like you say, it is my opus, it is my odyssey, it is my thing. And then it got to a point where I got such in the habit of delaying, that became the status quo. Uh, and so even now, where I feel like I'm not 100% happy, say like I think the cover could be better. I think the contents is great, I must say, but I know a lot of people judge a book by its cover. I
you
wanted
know what? If,
myself,
if people love a cliche, we've got a lot of them coming out today, but the cliche of all cliches is your own, right? Which is if you hear a cliche, it usually means there's something behind it.
yeah.
But you're doing well here, mate. You're reading them off. We should have a little
But
counter.
anyway, I mean, like, so yeah, cover will probably get tweaked at some point, but I thought, you know what, it's more important. Like, if I get run over by a bus, I need that information to be out there. And yes, that information is there in drips and drabs on my videos and my online courses, but really you want a book. But going back to the genesis of the book, so I started learning all this stuff back in 2011. I started making I was working at the Sainsbury's head office. I didn't want to be ill because every time I was ill, it's several £100s a day that I was missing out on. I also recognize that as a contractor, you're the first to go when the budgets get cut. And so I had to be better at my job and basically not get ill. So I put health as a priority because I recognized that I could be much better at my job when I was focused and productive. I also at the time wanted to do lots of other things. So I was joining Toastmasters, I was going to the gym before work. I was doing a personal development group that I was part of the committee of. So I was doing loads of things all the time. And also this whole stuff was very new to me, the personal development. Like I really threw myself in, even though I'd been doing it on and off since 2006. 2011 was my catalyst year.
You
You know,
became what I would call a self-development junkie.
yeah,
A
I
lot
was
of people
going,
go through this, right? Myself included. When you first find this space, you read as much, you absorb as much, you end up getting to a point where you need to start forming your own decisions and your own opinions. And you realize, well, a lot of the messages are the same under different covers. They're
yeah, I mean, I
disguising
was
different things.
reading
And
probably a book a week. I was going to a course once a month. I was not watching any TV, reading any news. I gave up the news, all that. If you saw me with headphones on, I wouldn't be listening to music. I was listening to, Tony Robbins, Dennis Waitley, Jim Rohn, Les Brown, Brian Tracy on repeat. I listened to every program they had, probably at least 5 to 15, 20 times for 5 years. That's all I listened to for 5 years. And so, anyway, I was doing all this stuff. And then after about 2 years, I realized I've made hundreds of changes to my own life, of which a lot of them I made in the first 30 days, but certainly within 3 months. And I noticed things like my focus improved, my energy improved, my resilience to disease, to illness improved. Whereas I was someone that used to get 4 or 5 colds a year. I don't think I had one for at least 5 or 6 years in that first period where I was really on it. And so I did a bunch of these things. And then me being a logical scientist person thought there must be a formula to this. There must be a system. There must be a way that I can teach this. And the reason I say that is because I was going to Toastmasters and I recognized that everything I was learning, it would be a shame if the knowledge dies with me, right? The only way it can go out to other people is if you let it go out to other people through dialogue, through writing, and so on. And so that's why I joined Toastmasters, the speaking club, because I wanted to become a better communicator and I wanted this information. I thought, what's the point of me learning it? And the biggest drawback I had, the biggest error, and I still make this error to this day, is I often think that I'm the last person on earth to learn that particular piece of information. So I think, oh my God, this is so obvious, right? Breathing, right? Breathing into the belly, right? How everyone must know. I must be stupid, right? I must be the last person out of 8 billion people to think about this.
Listen, I gave an exercise on this show years ago. You don't know what you don't know until you do, right? And that was when you led me to the oxygen advantage. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And very, very simply, and if you've listened to the earlier episodes of this podcast, because I'm repeating this again, what episode, maybe episode 3, episode 4, the idea that if you take a deep breath, we think a deep breath is, which is not, of course, a deep breath is it actually relates to how low in the body you're taking your breath from. And when you read that book, he teaches you that if you try and take a deep breath through the mouth, you'll only ever breathe from the top half of the body. If you take a deep breath through your nose, you'll realize that your whole body fills, not just the top half. And I never knew that. There I am going on these self-help journeys. I'm in my late 30s. I never knew you couldn't breathe deeply from your belly unless you breathed in through your nose.
Yeah. So this is exactly a perfect example of where
Test it, by the way, if you're listening to this and don't
I'm
believe me.
thinking, oh, everyone must know this. And so what compelled me to share this information was that, hang on a second, I'm a smart guy, right? I've got a first-class degree. I've got, years of experience. And if I don't know something, there's probably at least one other person on the planet that doesn't know it. And so I wanted to sort of share that information. And so that led me to basically, I was sitting on my floor of my office and I had a giant sheet of paper. You know those sheets of paper that you use for flip charts?
I do.
So I had a giant sheet of paper
know the
and I
story.
wrote down most of the 100 or 200 things that because I knowing me, right, I kept a list. I had a Word document of all the changes. And so I wrote them down on a big piece of paper. And then I looked at it for a while and I was seeing a pattern a pattern emerge. And I thought, and then what I realized was that all of these things, right? There was over 100, 200 things. Everything I'd changed effectively fell into 4 key areas. And then I developed those key areas and that I identified them. And then I actually went on an online, on a course by a guy called Brendan Bouchard. And it was quite good. It helped prompt me to create my own online course. But one of the things that really stuck out, and I remember, was him talking about frameworks. So if you think about Stephen Covey, right? You've interviewed his son, right? I think.
Yeah, twice.
Uh, yeah. And so Stephen Covey, famous for what? The
7 habits of highly successful people. So I didn't realize you were
Yeah.
testing me.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you're a bit.
Where is this? I am a big fan. I've read it several times. Also, his son wrote
Or whatever.
and sold 2
And-
million copies of his book, which is The Speed of
Yeah.
Trust.
Yeah. So the point is that there was a framework, right? He wasn't just listing, it was like 7 habits or I struggle to think of other things now, but basically it was about having a framework, having a model. And so that weekend is when I came up with the beat model. I actually had identified the 4 areas before that weekend. But I was trying to think of an acronym and, it was at one point it was called PNAR, PNAR and all that.
Yeah.
But
How did you go with that one?
yeah, I
honest.
didn't go with that one. So eventually it became the beat model, which is the subject of the book Super Vitality. And essentially that's what led me to start writing the book. About a year after I developed the model, I started doing the online courses. And at the time, right, people aren't reading so much, everyone's watching videos, doing online courses. But I still felt that ultimately you need a book. And so I started writing it then. And most of it, to be fair, was probably done by about 2018, 2019. But then I wrote the other book in the meantime. There was a bit of a pause and a hiatus on my side of things for various reasons. And then it was 90% done. and then I just finished off the last 10% last few years. But
For those not familiar, this is, as I said at the start of the show, this isn't your first rodeo. You mentioned your last book, 2018, Working Well, but you did a book before that, which I have on my shelf. I'm not sure if it's in front of me here. It might be on this
yeah, the
bookshelf.
Thought Gym was
The Thought
20.
Gym.
The Thought Gym was 2013. They got released. That book, actually, interestingly enough, was a bit of a download from some force somewhere, and I did prep for it. So I'd written some chapter outlines in the proceeding, but I had 2 weeks off at Christmas over the winter of 2011, and I wrote that in 2 weeks. However, then it was 5 months of prep, 5 months of editing, rewriting, and all that. But the 2 weeks was the big chunk, and I also, at the time for that book, I was doing a thing called photo reading. I'm not sure if you're familiar with photo
Yeah,
reading.
you told me about it. This the speed reading essentially is
It's a version of that, but it's slightly different. And I was reading, like, 2-3 books a week in that way, to get the information I needed. Because a lot of the time you don't need 100% of information from a book. And actually, that's why the book that I've just released is great, because you can use it as a reference guide. I don't want people to be put off by the big nature of the book, because it is a big book, because it's my opus, it's my odyssey. However, you can just pick up and flick to the chapter that you want about meditation or about digital nutrition.
Let me ask you a
Or
question. Obviously, we've been doing this podcast now for, well, over a year. I'm not sure how long it's been. It's 60
2.5
yeah.
years. 2.5
Yeah.
or
Is it 2.5? Wow, that's what time flies.
2.5.
So it's your opus, and we know that if you were to write this book again in 10 years' time, it would be different because you're gonna learn. We're always learning, always evolving. Science will change, your thought processes will change, your beliefs potentially will change, whatever. What's the thing that you've learned most recently that found its way into the book as part of your own self-discovery?
I think I might have mentioned it last week. The thing I learned that I updated it was the breath hold guy.
But that's a scientific,
Okay.
that's a
Uh,
citation. I'm talking about you, for something that where it's changed your own view on the world, your own beat model, something you've added or evolved that's maybe impacted you in the last year.
I don't know that I've changed anything in the last year. Now, I will come up with an answer in a second. But one thing I do want to say is that I believe that the contents of the book is somewhat timeless. Yes, the stuff's going to change, but ultimately, what makes it, I think, usable and effective is they're fundamentals a lot of the time, but they're beyond fundamentals that people think about. I think, what did I
Let me
add?
give you a longer frame of reference then. Let's use since we launched this show.
Yeah, I'm just trying to
Did you
think
turn off
now,
it?
because there's so much in that book. I think the thing I added, but I kind of knew about it, was more about the financial side of things. So I put a chapter in there about finance, because finance can lead to stress. Finance issues
Yeah.
can lead to
Massive
stress.
links between financial health and
Yeah,
mental health.
actually a big reason for divorces. Um, and so, even though it feels like, oh, why is this a wellness book? But now it's all about finance, because I'm trying to cover everything that really people need to know in order to manage their stress, manage their sleep, and to all these other things, the hundreds of things that go into it. So that bit was added in, and that was really the money jar system that we've talked about in the
Yeah.
past, I think.
I haven't read your book yet. It hasn't gone out. I know you've given me some advanced previews about elements to it, but I know we've discussed it on this show. But you mentioned the word divorce, and it put something into my head because I think the stat, don't quote me, but it's along the lines of 73% of all divorces happen during that window of time where a lot of partners or women may be going through the menopause. Do you go into that level of science? Is it genderless? Do you talk about the differences between men, men are from Mars, women from Venus? Did you talk about the differences in our hormonal makeup or anything like that in the book?
No, I don't actually. And the reason for that is, yes, there are massive differences in certain areas. Like, for example, fasting. Right, we've talked about fasting before, I think, and I'd mentioned that you do need to kind of look into it differently if you're a female versus a male. But a lot of the things are genderless, let's call it. When I'm talking about digital nutrition, when I'm talking about sleep, when I'm talking about meditation, mindfulness, there isn't a huge distinction to be made, I don't think. So I don't recall making a huge distinction in that regard. Um, Yeah, I don't think I do actually. I think
Uh,
habit formation, how you talk to yourself, all of these things um, are universal traits, are universal things that we go through. So there wasn't really a need to distinguish between male, female, or anything like
So what
that.
makes this book, I mean, I know I'm trying to help you here because I know a little about it without giving the answers away. I want to ask the author, well, I've got a great opportunity. But what makes this book different to other books that are already on the shelves?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, this book becomes the one book that people need to read, right? If you never pick up another book about health, wellness, well-being in your life, or you don't ever want to, but you want to know about things that will make you more effective, more resilient, more energized, more vitalized than 99.9999% of people on the planet, this would be the only book you would need, because most books do the opposite of what I've done, is they go narrow into one topic firstly. This doesn't. I think what most people need is breadth, not depth, when it comes to these matters, right? Yes, you could be the expert in breath work, but then you negate everything else in your life. You're not going to be the healthiest, best version of yourself. So that's the thing, is I give a lot of breadth and I give enough depth that people go beyond the surface level, but they get to a point where, you know, most people on the planet will never
It's
get
a
to.
it's a bit like a diet, right? Diets often don't work because they're too narrow. What you need is a way for living where, because of all the different things you've done, it's not being a you don't necessarily become a breath work expert by reading your book, but you'll know enough where you can incorporate it into your daily life. Same with
Yeah.
diet,
And
same with
it's all relative.
devices, and so on.
So you'll be a breathwork expert compared to 9 out of 10 other
Yeah.
people next to you on the tube. That's one thing. The other thing is the simplicity. So, like, wellness becomes quite a complicated concept for a lot of people, and the way that, and this is not me saying it, this is the feedback I've got from delivering talks to thousands of people and over the last 10 years, 12 years. One of the things that comes up repeatedly is feedback, is just how practical my stuff is, how easy and accessible it is, how it just makes sense. Even people who are quote unquote experts in the field of health wellness, who talk about these things, and they may talk about multiple facets of well-being. So they may not just be talking about sleep, maybe they're talking about exercise as well, and nutrition. But the way I put it together, they're like, ah, that just makes it easy to remember and simple and accessible. So that's one thing. And probably a big selling point, I think, is that it just makes everything that you've learned make sense. And also, when I say that, is since I developed the model, I've learned lots, right? I developed it in 2014. I've learned more things since then. But what I haven't been able to find is something that I've learned that doesn't fit into one of those four areas. Like, anything and everything I've learned when it comes to health, wellness, longevity, vitality, whatever, goes into those four areas. So I feel like it is kind of had a litmus test as well. Um, Now, naturally, there's only certain amount of pages in the book, so there's going to be hundreds of things that may eventually crop up that go into those four areas that maybe aren't covered in the book. But by and large, what you're getting is the best of me in that book. So I would say that makes it different, is that it's super accessible, super practical. Most of the advice I give doesn't cost money, can be integrated into your normal life, but it's just makes sense. It takes hundreds of different complicated ideas and makes them into a really easy, digestible framework and system for people. And you know, not to kind of spoil the reading, right? The model, as you know, is called the Leadership Beat model. And simply what I say to people is, if you're feeling offbeat, right? When we're feeling on beat, we're feeling offbeat. If you're feeling offbeat, and I ask myself this as well all the time, is what do I need to focus on from those four areas? It might be more than one thing within those areas, but if I'm feeling offbeat today, is it the B, the E, the A, or the T, or multiple areas that I need to focus on to get me back on beat? And it becomes a very easy and accessible framework or
I know
guide.
we've talked about it on many episodes, but tell people what BEATS stands for.
Yeah, so B stands for brain, which is a metaphor, really. for things like your psychology, your mindset, but also things like gratitude, uh, your values,
Would that
language.
include spiritual in there?
Now, I want to come to spiritual in a second because that's an
It's a question I
interesting.
wanted to ask. 'Cause I tell you why I wanted to ask it. I'm going to preface your response quickly, because obviously I was a big fan of Simon Ong's book, and Simon Ong talks about his five. He has 5 buckets essentially, and there's lots of different ways of doing these things. But he has 5 different buckets that if one of those is down, you're not going to be 100% honest. And he has a bucket for spirituality, and doesn't necessarily mean religion. It means what it says. It's spirituality and whatnot. So I wanted to ask you because that's kind of his 5th bucket. And the other 4 are similar to yours with different names and whatever, but they same ethos that they all fit into
Hmm.
those 4. So I wondered where that sat with you.
Okay, I will answer that in a second, and I'll answer that once I've done the other 3 for
Go for it.
because I want to show you something to help illustrate it. Um, so yeah, B, brain, mindset. It's also about things like education, growth, right? For example, we tend to have more energy when we're learning things. And I have frameworks in there like the E3 baby mindset, which is something I discovered whilst observing at the time my niece, who now is 11, but she was much younger back then, and my other nieces. And I was thinking about what 3 things do babies and toddlers tend to do. And I'm just been looking after my newest niece, who's 2 years old, and is just now getting to know my name and say Uncle Harry. But they explore, they enjoy, and they evolve. So that's what I call the E3 baby mindset. Or
Mm.
also another version of it is being able, always be learning and evolving. And so when you learn, you grow, you tend to have more energy, more vitality. So all of that comes on the brain. Elements is about 5 elements: air, water, earth, fire, and ether. And they're metaphors for things that you nourish your body with. We talked about breath work, so that would fall under the air, for example. A is activity, which is not about movement only or exercise. It's also about the things you do in a day. Do you have passion? Do you have purpose? Connection? Do you have fun? Do you play? Your habits, all that sort of stuff. And then T stands for tranquility, which is the rest, repair, recuperation part, such as sleep, fasting, meditation, mindfulness, time off, holidays, digital detoxing, digital nutrition, and so on. Now, spirituality, where that comes in, really, and I don't go too much into it in the book, but it touches all of those 4 points. And so, because for example, spirituality, and the root word for spiritus is breath, right? So that could come for a breath techniques for some people. For other people, it's meditation. For other people, it's that community part, which comes under the A part, which is where you go to church and things. For others, it's about having a gratitude practice. And so actually, spirituality, I've just got, as it happens, the t-shirt on for my beat model. You can see there's a hidden S in the design that I created years ago, the blue S,
Yeah.
right? Which stands for 2 things, right? One, like being superhuman, right? So I wanted there to be an S in there, but also the fact that your spiritual self touches all of these areas, right? And it encompasses everything. So for me, spirituality is really about the individual's interpretation of what that means and the practicalities of how you execute on that. So a practicality of how you exercise spirituality for some people might be going to church, right? Which will then come under a connection piece, but it might be under a prayer piece, which will maybe come under the tranquility piece, and so on. So spirituality encompasses all of those areas. It kind of envelops it, if you like.
Okay. Oh, no. I wanted to ask the question.
Yeah.
Maybe the one thing that you can't put into a single box. Going back,
No, I
but
don't think so. And I mean, for me, sometimes I was thinking about it this morning. I went for a swim in the sea, went to the beach, and it's feeling that connection to nature, right? It can be a spiritual practice for me, right? That earthing, which comes under the earth part of elements. So for me, it encompasses everything, right? It's like an undercurrent, if you like. Yeah.
very good. So if I was picking up this book now, and maybe some of our listeners already have, and it'd be great to get their feedback on our Instagram channel, which is mindful_pass_podcast. And our listener manages that channel as well. So please let us know the feedback. I'm sure Harry would be keen to receive it. And definitely review it if you're buying on Amazon. Leave those reviews; they really help the
Yeah,
ranking.
really, really important to review it, and hopefully with a 5-star review, because that really helps things that I
Help.
hope you
What are
feel
the
it.
what are the first kind of insights a reader's going to discover without giving it too much of the book away? We want to find them for themselves, but a couple of maybe a couple of nuggets we can share
I mean,
that aren't universal truths. They might be new to them.
I
Aha
think the
moment.
what I'm hoping that people will discover through the course of the book and through the important things through the application. So at the end of each chapter, there's basically a 3-point summary of that chapter, then a 3-point plan of potential things they can implement. But hopefully, through the discovery of implementing those things, is that how you currently feel, because this was what it was like for me. So I started this journey at 33 years old, and I already felt pretty amazing, like at 33. But you don't know how we don't know. And so when I started doing these practices, I realized, oh my God, there's so much more. There's so much more to feeling great and waking up with energy and all this sort of stuff. And I believe there's more to know that I don't currently know as well. And so hopefully there's a light bulb moment that goes off where they think, all I've been to now, there is still more, right? There's still more potential. And the whole point of what I talk about is about unlocking your inner superhuman, right? Which basically doesn't mean you're Superman, you're a superhero or anything like that, but it just means that you can, run your full day at work, but do your side hustle and play
You're
with your
capable
kids.
of so much more than we know. And it's
Yeah,
like David Goggins' book, right? And a little insight when I read that, and as someone who does a lot of endurance sports, when he says when you're in the Navy SEALs, they teach you that when you think you're done, you're only at 30%. You got 70% you can still go. At that moment where you think there's nothing left in the tank, that means you're 30% done. That's when your brain kicks in and says, "Hey, I need to look at caution now. I need to look at safety. I'm going to switch all the systems on. I'm going to prevent you from taking any further. I've got to look after you here. I need homeostasis." But actually, in the Navy SEALs, you've got to be able to push beyond that. And you realize that you get through a little bit of that discomfort, and suddenly you unlock that hidden 70% that 99% of the population will never discover. And I was like, wow, that for me was a light bulb
yeah.
when I went and did some ultra races. And you do discover, I don't know if I've ever got to the whole 70, you realize there's always a bit more.
I think you're quite good at pushing that. I remember watching the late Michael Mosley, Dr. Michael Mosley. So I remember watching his stuff years and years ago. And I think I might even reference him. I think I referenced him a couple of times in the book. But he did a program probably 10 years ago or more now, where he had a device on his head and it was measuring the bits in the brain that were effectively doing what you were talking about. So when you get to a pain point, it tells you to shut down because it's trying to protect the body from more damage. But actually, like you say, there's another 70% to go.
Yeah.
And when you kind of override that, which he, then did, I think, I'm not sure if he overrid it by they sent a pulse in there, or I can't remember exactly what it was. I'll have to look it up. But yeah, so there's an interesting program actually showing what you're talking about there. So I think like hopefully people will get that moment, that light bulb moment. But actually also what I'm hoping is it will answer lots of questions or conversations they have. And the reason I say that is the last week alone, I've had conversations with several different people about a variety of random topics. And almost every conversation I realized ended with me, actually read about that bit in my book, because I talk about that in the book. I talk about this in the book. So hopefully there's going to be, you know,
That's important
feedback
actually,
come through.
because I'm going to speak on your behalf because I know about the book. It's not necessarily a book to read from A to Z, is it? It can be that, of course, but you can use it as a consistent reference. So if you have that challenge in your life right now, you can zip straight through to the section that really is on that element, and you can kind of solve it in real time, which is why, as you say, it doesn't really age. You leave it on your shelf when you have an issue, whether it's about health and diet, for example, whether it's about sleep, whether it's about financial resilience, whatever it is that you're going through in that moment. Let's be honest, we know we need to be more kind to each other because everyone's going through something. Whatever that thing is they're going through, they can use that as a little bit of reference guide and
Yeah.
pick it up and let
Also one thing that kind of delayed the book is at some point about a year or two ago, I decided I was kind of writing the book for people, but I was also writing the book for me. And so the book for me is the big 467 page, 503 citation book. But I fully understand, my sisters included, I'm not going to sit and read a 467-page book. Right? They might use it like you've just suggested as a reference now and then, but unlikely. One of the bits of feedback that almost like everyone that ever read or purchased the second book, Working Well, said was they loved the format. They loved the fact that they could basically get through it in 90 minutes. That book was about 112 pages, if I remember. And so what I did is I took the Super Vitality book, which was 120,000 odd words, which is a huge amount when you compare my first book, The Fortune, was 30,000 words. So over 4 times bigger than that first book. And I reduced it to 15,000 words, and I made it essential reading, right? So that people, and my hope is that people basically pick up both copies, the light version and the big version, because the light version is that aid memoir, it's that reminder, it's a thing you can literally put in your back pocket, you can give to friends and family that aren't really gonna be as invested as maybe you are. And then you've got the bigger book that you can dive into when you want to see the citations, the research, to understand why things are the way they are, the examples, the more exercises, whatever it might be. So you have both books that work as a complementary to each other. So that's so that book, again, you don't necessarily need to even read the small book cover to cover. You can dip into 4 sections, but it's split into effectively four chapters.
Good.
But with
So
key elements.
last question on this. I know I'm aware that it's a little bit of a plug for what is going to be an exceptional book that's going to change your life. So we make no apology really for the way we've structured this episode. I wanted to really, having done these episodes, we do this for ourselves and we do it for our listeners, and we get a lot of enjoyment out of it. And I wanted to bring your book to life because it is an opus, and I've known you as a friend before I knew you as a host, a co-host on the show. And I know how much work's gone into it, and I want people to buy it. I want people to hear about it. I want people to go and buy it for their family and friends. What's the lesson that you've learned during the book writing process? There are a lot of everyone says they have a book in them. You know that I'm writing a couple of books at the moment. I've got one on my work related ones are probably of less passion, but they're more informational. I've got a passion project book that I'm hoping to publish in February, which is really centered around fear. So I'm going to learn some of these as we go through. Um, what's been your lesson for those that want to write the book and are procrastinating because they are themselves fearful of whatever that fear is, whether people read it or whatever? What would you say?
There's a few things I would say. One, like, writing a book is not a healthy pastime, if I'm honest. Right? You tend to do the opposite of the things that I might suggest in the book. Right? You're sitting down for too long, you're not out in the sunlight enough, and so on. So it's not a healthy process, and it is a challenge, right? It is a challenge to write a book. However, there are ways that, so you can write the book a little bit easier. So one of the things I did with this book that I didn't do on the other books when I was first writing it is I knew that I wanted 4 sections, right? B, E, A, and T. And I knew that I was having a few chapters within each one. Right? I knew there'll be a chapter on meditation, one on mindfulness, and so on. So what I did is I wrote all the chapter headings on A4 pieces of paper, and I put them all on my wall of my office. And anytime there was an idea, a story, something that popped to mind that was to do with that section, I would write it up. So I did that for the first few months, right? So by the end of a few months, I had a whole wall full of ideas. So it became a lot easier to write. So that's one thing I did in this book that I hadn't done in the previous books, that I learned. The other thing, I guess, is a bit like coming full circle to what we talked about at the beginning, is this idea of it not it's not going to be necessarily perfect. One thing I learned from, I think it was Neil Strauss, when I listened to his interview with Tim Ferriss years ago, is that there's usually 3 books that you write. There's the book that the first draft, which is selfishly for you. Then there's the edited draft, then the one that the audience eventually gets to. I think with a book, again, I come back to the bit about fear and recognizing that people aren't going to watch your YouTube videos necessarily, is that I think first and foremost is write the book that you want to read, right? Write the book that you want to have. Yes, you can try and get into the mind of your audience, right? Which would be most conventional advice. But you also have to think, it's a bit like when you start a business, or I started doing what I would do. It's like, would I still do this if I wasn't getting paid for it? And the answer I know is yes, because for a long time, and sometimes there's peaks and troughs of when I get paid for doing what I do. We are doing this without being paid for this podcast. So go into it with that mindset of, it being something that you need to get out to the world. Not necessarily it's going to sell 1 million copies a week, right? As great as that would be, and I would love that to happen. So what is it that you need to get out? And for this book, Super Vitality, it was almost like burning a hole in my belly, and my heart, that I had to get it out. So I feel that that's something I learned, but I think the lesson I'm going to learn most from this book, which I probably won't recognize until after it's come out, is that I do feel like it's not a bookend, but it's sort of like a chapter, a milestone that had to be reached, that had to help
It
me move on to the
it
next
leads
thing.
me to a question then, and I came across this when I listened to the Johnny Wilkinson episode of the
Okay.
High Performance podcast, and people
Yeah.
haven't heard it.
Well, yeah, I know what you're going to ask.
But
Go
you
for it.
know I'm going now. But if you haven't listened to this episode, honestly, it's not like the Johnny Wilkinson you've come to know and love when he played rugby. It's really the aftermath, and he had his greatest moment, which he'd imagined since he was a child, when he scored that last second Hollywood
Mm,
drop goal to win the World Cup for England in the World Cup final against Australia. This is, by your own admission, you've called it an opus. This is the culmination of 10 years of hard work that you've now got to press. It's going to go live. So, it's going out tomorrow, right? So this is going to be a moment. Where next for you? How have you anticipated how that might feel? Is there going to be a potential low here where I know it's initial anticipation, who's buying and you're answering copies and maybe you're on the talking circuit, whatever, but what's next for Harry? Because your knowledge is now going to be out there.
yeah. So I think, firstly, before I answer that, one of the things I do, I think I mentioned it in the book as well, but I've talked a lot about it when it comes to goals, is that you've got to fall in love with the process, not just the goal or something like that, because most of life is the process, right? And so for me, I love the process of teaching, creating, formulating ideas, coming up with models, frameworks, and so on. I think where this goes for me, and I've thought about it a lot, is because one of the blessings and the curses I feel like I've got, and it comes back to why I was saying what was unique about this book, is that I take a 36,000-foot view of health and well-being. So I see all the different intricacies of things and how they all connect together. But it also means that I'm not if you're thinking of breathwork expert, you immediately think Wim Hof, right? But you're not thinking about Wim Hof when it comes to nutrition, right? For nutrition, I don't know, maybe you're thinking, I don't know, whatever, Jamie Oliver or Doctor's Kitchen, or I don't know, someone else, right? So I've been toying with the idea of where am I hanging my hat? Where is it going to be, and what is going to be my hook to grab people through the door? Now, partly some people say my hook is the fact that I'm helping people feel superhuman, right? But at the same time, I recognize that sometimes it can be more powerful to have an in, right? For a long time, people will recognize me for the smoothies, right? Because I'm always doing my smoothies. I've always got my smoothies around. Is that going to be the way in, right? That helps me teach them about sleep and grounding and digital nutrition. Or is it going to be breath work, or is it going to be something else? So I think my next bit after that is working out what that maybe singular hook is, that then leads into the bigger model.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So you're actually going from broad to narrow potentially.
Potentially, well, because the thing is, what's always been a fear for me, and I've known this ever since I was a kid, right? I never became the expert in any one subject, but I was always in the top sort of 2 to 5% in all subjects, pretty much. I was never the best at football or basketball or athletics, but I was always on the teams of all of them. And I never allowed that focus, and focus, again, acronym that I came across maybe 5 years ago that I love, FOCUS, focus, follow one course until success. And something I really admire about you is you go all in on when I often use you as an example. I say, when you turned your hand to obstacle course racing, within a year or 2 years, was it, you were doing the world championship
2
amateur,
years, yeah.
world championship amateur ones or something like that?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. So you go full on, right? and you're very good at focus, right? And then you go and you go somewhere else and you focus, and you go somewhere else and focus. Whereas
I'm all in on fear at the minute. I've been for the last 3
yeah,
years, as you know.
that,
That's what my next book's going to
so
be on. And
you go all in and you go laser like, um, and I go tend to go quite broad because I always think, oh, I don't want to miss out. Like even with friendship groups and all that, I'm like friends with everyone. The Mind Valley stuff, right? I'm like friends with everyone rather than having a focus group. And so that has been the blessing and the curse with this is that what's been great about it is that I've been able to look at a health and well-being practice and not be so pulled into it that I miss everything else. And that has allowed me because I actually heard Tim Ferriss say this years ago, and I was glad he said it because he's someone with a voice who echoed what I'd been thinking about for many years prior to hearing it, was that I think the future belongs to the generalist. And one thing I remember I heard when I was 16 years old, and it was a biology teacher tell me this, and this really impacted me. And he was talking about how, when you're younger, you know a little bit about a lot. Then you get older and more specialized, you know quite a lot about less stuff until you know really loads and loads about very minimal stuff. And then until in the end, you know everything about nothing. And I really, really resonated with that because, you get a PhD person, someone who's doing their postdoctorates and all that. They're an expert in not physics, not quantum physics, but like
my mum did a PhD in hoverflies. I get it. It's very, very, very narrow and niche because it's got to
exactly.
be
So
not
you
been
know
done before.
everything about basically nothing. And so I think that was a fear that I had ever since like a child, where I wanted to know enough about everything rather than a lot about one thing. Um,
They do say,
so
well, they do say this. I think it's probably a saying I've just made up on the spot, but I'm linking a few things together now with my sales background in recruitment. But I understand you probably want to live as a generalist. You want to be of everything, but specialist sells. So
well,
that's the
yeah,
difference. I mean, I hope your book sells
yeah.
hundreds and
This
hundreds
is
of thousands of
this
copies.
is what I was going to say. Like for example, there's that meme. There's a meme of Jeff Bezos, right? So there's two pictures of him side by side, where there's a picture from him in 1993 or 1992 where he's looking like a real dweeb and a dog, and it's like he's hunched over, no frame to him whatsoever, and he's like, I sell books. And then the picture next to him where he's all that beefed up, jacked up guy that he is now, he's like, I sell whatever the fuck I want.
Yeah.
And that Amazon example I use for a lot of people as well is that initially Amazon books, now they sell whatever they want.
Or when you find your hook, when you find your niche, right, you can then
Yeah.
broaden. It's usually you don't go the other way around, I guess, and I hope that you got to. Most people start narrow and broaden. You've gone broad and they're going to go narrow. But look, what I'm really hoping for is that you sell lots of copies. That when it goes live tomorrow, the last episode we recorded comes out tomorrow in preparation for when the book goes out. So we'll have next time we meet, buddy, people will listen to this before we know the results, which will be interesting. But next time we record, we'll know just how many we've sold in the first. Not we're going to give numbers away, but hopefully we'll have having some listener feedback by that point, maybe.
Yeah, hopefully. So yeah,
And well
fingers
done,
crossed.
congratulations! Like from a friend to friend, I'm really proud. If that's the right
Yeah,
word of what you've achieved, and how no one, as you said, behind the scenes, no one really will ever know. They can imagine. Will ever know how much dedication's gone into this book.
yeah, a lot of effort now, and also, this is all me, right? It's not an AI driven like book or anything like that. It's not a ghostwritten book. It's 100% me. So
Good. Well, good luck. Well, look, listeners, go get it. Well, there'll be a link in the show notes of this episode. There's also a link in the show notes of the episode we just released. So if you listen to this one or the one before, you will be able to get a copy of the book by just going through the show notes and clicking that link and helping Harry out. If you can leave a review, if you're an avid listener, you enjoy the show, um, leave a review for the show, of course, but please leave a review for the book as well. I'll let you have the closing today, Harry. This is your book, your opus. Close the show.
well, thank you. Well, first thing before I close the show, I do want to wish you a speedy recovery. Right?
Thank you. I'm feeling a bit ropey. I'm trying to cover it.
Yeah, and no, I think you've done a really good job. But I know that when someone, people like us who are so physical, so active, and put a lot of stock in our physicality, when something's not right, it can really throw us off in other areas. So that'd be the first thing. And I think for everybody else, I just want to say, like I often close many of my emails to my group, stay strong and stay super.